Budget of Renewed Hope. That is the name of the 2024 budget of the federal government of Nigeria. But so tonight, our focus is on how hopeful should Nigerians be. To share more insight about the 2024 budget is Babajide Ogunsanwo, founder of Leadership by Data and Channels Television's Data Analyst. Thank you very much, Babajide, for joining us on the News at 10 as always.
Good evening, Anne.
Good evening. There have been different perspectives to the budgets presentation by the president, of course. What are the most important figures in this budget?
Before we look at the important figures, we could look at these important figures by looking at the present figures, looking at the present state of the budget, looking at where we're coming from the past, and then to look at the future. So to look at the present, we could look at it from the revenue and the expenditure side. And in simple terms for the common man, on respect to expenditure, the government is planning 27.5 trillion naira. And in simple terms, that budget comes to approximately 350 naira per day per Nigerian, which simply means that for the common man, you get an egg in the morning, an egg in the afternoon, and an egg at night. So this is the budget per Nigerian, looking at how the government wants to spend money. A simple perspective on that. Still on the present, and we can look at it from the revenue side. The government is planning best case scenario next year, 18 trillion naira. And this is why this is important. 18 trillion naira represents approximately $24 billion. Now, I want you to keep that number in mind, $24 billion. That is what the government is expecting for revenue next year, best case scenario. But Anne, Tesla, that car company, their budget for next year revenue in excess of $100 billion. The federal government of Nigeria, $24 billion. And Microsoft, they are saying their revenue budget, when their board and MD met, the revenue budget for Microsoft next year in excess of $200 billion. And let me make myself clear. The federal government of Nigeria, the budget proposal of the president says it intends to earn a revenue of $24 billion for all of next year. Samsung, the phone making company, Samsung Electronics, their revenue budget for next year in excess of $250 billion. And in simple terms, what the federal government of Nigeria intends to earn for all of next year is what Samsung says it will earn in 30 days. So that gives you a perspective of why some say this budget, in terms of revenue, is chicken change. And in terms of expenditure, is really just an egg in the morning, in the afternoon, and in the night for Nigerians. You know, my grandfather used to tell me, Jide, Nigeria is blessed, but Nigeria is a sleeping giant. If my grandfather was around today, the story will be changed. Nigeria is no longer a sleeping giant. Nigeria is now a snoring giant.
Wow.
That is the situation. And so, like you started, a budget of renewed hope. The challenge is, if we take a look into the namings of the previous budgets, Nigeria is already running out of names to call its budgets. We've called our budgets all sorts of things. If you take a look at our history, even in the last 8 years, we've come up with all sorts of names for the budget. Before budget of renewed hope, we've seen the 2016 budget of change. We've seen the budget of recovery and growth. 2019 budget of continuity. 2021 budget of economic recovery and resilience. Budget of economic growth. And so the summary is we need to take a look at other things and focus on budgets that will have impacts, not just coming up with names that we call our budget, because already we are running out of names to call our budget. So what do you think will be the name of the 2025 budget? From what we've seen in history, we've used all possible names to describe our budgets, yet the impact is not really being felt.
Which brings me to my next question, talking about impact. The budget is 6 trillion naira, more than the 2023 budget. Does this guarantee economic growth or even development going forward?
Now, the answer to that question is to simply look at previous budgets and to look at how much previous budgets differed year on year, and then to look at the economic growth by the side. And if we take a look at the history, remember 2016, 6 trillion naira budget, which was 35% more than the 2015 budget. Economic growth in that year declined by 2%. Take a look at 2017, 7.4 trillion naira. That was 23% more than the 2016 budget. Yet, economic growth, 1%. Take a look at 2023, 21.8 trillion naira budget. That was 33% more than the budget of 2022. And despite a budget growth of 33%, the economy grew only by 3%. And so in statistical terms, when we look at how the budgets have been growing year on year, and the facts on how the economy has been growing, the correlation shows zero. There is no correlation between our historical budget growth and how the economy has been growing. And those are the facts. However, we've still got some good news. If we take a look at the top 5 highlights of the president's speech, it still gives Nigerians some hope. Let's take a look at some of the things that made this speech memorable, despite the challenges that we've seen in our previous budgets. We've seen the president talk about constituting a foundation which will erect the future of this great nation, and he hopes that this budget will allow him lay the foundation to other budgets, which seems to be a positive move. We've also seen in the president's statement him also making reference to the current situation, saying that imagine we are attempting to draw water from a dry well. In simple terms, what the president is saying is the situation he met was worse than he expected. Same keeping into the president's budget statement, he says he's committed to meeting our debt obligations. In simple terms, the president is saying Nigeria will not default on its domestic and foreign loans, which will give hope and respite to borrowers and to the financial market. So whatever Nigeria owes, Nigeria has the capacity and will pay. The president also hopes that the economy will grow by a minimum of 3.76%. This is still far below his promises of double-digit economic growth. However, the president is saying that defense, security will still be his top priorities. And so that is the summary of the situation in terms of looking at it from the past and the present.
So you talked about defense, education, and health. Those sectors are getting the highest in terms of allocation this time. Do these sectors align with the president's promises?
Yes, they do. In that order, you've said it. Defense gets the highest allocation, followed by education, followed by health. But why does defense get the highest priority? And that's because everything is related to defense. Unfortunately, after the budget presentation, the Chief of Defense Staff General, Christopher Musa, has also come out to state clearly why this budget is different. And if we take a look at some of his remarks, what he is saying is that going forward, the Nigerian Armed Forces will also prioritize civil relations. So the Chief of Defense Staff is saying that, yes, peace is a necessity for education, but education is also a necessity for peace. In summary, what we are looking at is between the president and the service chiefs, we're going to be seeing an implementation of a collaboration with other sectors. So clearly what we're looking at in this budget is defense and education will strongly be collaborating. And yes, the president hopes to spend a lot more on healthcare, hospitals, and investing in new health projects. That is the situation we find ourselves today. However, and in the final analysis, we need to take a look at the critical assumptions in this budget. And here are the challenges with regard to the critical assumptions. January to September this year, the federal government has spent 12.7 trillion naira. In simple terms, on an average this year, average monthly expenditure this year, 1.4 trillion naira. The president is saying next year he intends to move from an average of 1.4 trillion naira per month to an average of 2.3 trillion naira per month. That seems highly optimistic. Debt service, year to date, January to September, 5.7 trillion naira. The budget for next year, 8.25 trillion naira. That seems reasonable. Personnel and pension cost, January to September this year, 3.7 trillion naira. For next year, based on wage growth, the budget is 6.5 trillion naira approximately. That looks reasonable. Capital expenditure this year, and we've spent only 1.4 trillion naira on capital expenditure. However, next year, the president is saying 8.7 trillion naira. Looking at our trends, that is highly optimistic. And finally, looking at our revenue. This year, the federal government of Nigeria has earned 8.6 trillion naira, an average of 960 billion naira per month. The president is saying next year he wants to move from an average of 960 billion naira per month to an average of 1.5 trillion naira per month. Based on the analysis and the trends, that is highly optimistic. And finally, we look at our loans assumptions from the budget year to date. We've borrowed 4 trillion naira. Next year, the budget is an additional borrowings of 7.8 trillion naira. And that is the summary of the budget. We've looked at it from the past, present, and the future. However, finally, and again, remember what my grandfather told me. Nigeria was a sleeping giant. This fact shows we are now a snoring giant. And Anne, you do not wake a snoring giant with a tap.
Nah.
This budget is a tap based on the facts.
All right. So I think we need cold water to pour on this snoring giant.
A lot of cold water. Don't forget your budget is right here. An egg in the morning, an egg in the afternoon, and an egg at night.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Babajide Ogunsewo, founder of Leadership by Data and Channels Television's data analyst, for your time. And always, this is your interesting contribution on the News at 10.
It's always my pleasure.